Hello. Terry, can you hear me? Terry, can you hear me? Terry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened there. For some reason, it kept saying that the organizer has closed out the meeting, and it kept booting me. So hopefully, we don't continue to have whatever issue that issue was. For those of you on the line, I apologize. We're having some technical difficulties here. Everyone and their mother is online right now, working from home. So I don't know. I guess sometimes these things are a little bit spotty. Terry, are you good to go ahead and get started here in just a minute?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
And I think we should be good. It looks like for some reason I was getting booted, but it looks like no one else was. Were you having to get kicked off and restarted, Terry, or
yes,
were you able to stay on?
yeah, I tried several times. So
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like we should be good now. Let's see. So I will go ahead and get this going. Let me get my screen sharing going. Okay.
Tacoma chapter of SCORE. Are you getting any feedback on your end?
Nope. You sound great on my end, Terry.
Okay. I wanted to kind of reiterate what Kevin was saying is with the advent of the coronavirus, things have changed a great deal in our lives, and that doesn't exclude SCORE activities. In the past, our workshops have been face-to-face workshops, but due to the limitations, we're converting to online workshops. And we're in a learning curve here at the Tacoma chapter of SCORE. In fact, this is our very first online kind of workshop. We expect we'll be doing more, so just look forward to that in the future. Of course, the good news is you'll be able to do it from the comfort of your home or home office. So anyway, welcome. So the workshop today is very introductory, very front end of thinking about starting a business, how to reduce risk and find the right fit. SCORE is affiliated with the Small Business Administration. We have about 300 chapters across the country, well over 10,000 volunteers. Most of the activities that we provide at SCORE are one-to-one and usually face-to-face mentoring, but we do have and are increasing our ability to offer phone, email, and video online mentoring. So just know that we're moving into this area where we can social distance and still provide services to small businesses. You'll find the Seattle SCORE internet address here. They've been a real resource for our chapter in providing content material, so I'm going to give a shout out to them. In the past, we've provided workshops in Tacoma and of course more available in Seattle, and because they were face-to-face, we offered some of the same workshops. Well, now with the advent of video online kind of workshops, I would encourage you to check out their website. And as I think I noticed for this month of April coming up, they have 12 online workshops that you can take from the comfort of your home. And we'll be moving into that area more, but for now, this is the way it is. So the SBA again is a big partner. You'll see their website on this page. beyond that, I wanted to say the Small Business Administration says that they estimate there's over 28 million businesses in the U.S. and of course the majority of all those businesses are being affected by our coronavirus challenges. And the good news is, legislation was passed recently to provide some support for those businesses. And we're trying to be a resource for all those people. So in the past, prior to this advent of the unprecedented coronavirus, almost half of all the businesses in the first 5 years would, according to statistics from the SBA, would likely fail. We'll just hope that going forward that we won't make that dramatically worse, even though we know there's going to be some considerable challenges. What we do know is that those businesses that do survive this issue we're dealing with now, and then just normal business environment, those that plan for their startup and unexpected issues are more likely than any business to be the survivor. So we know that planning is pretty darn important. So Kevin, a couple slides down from now, if you'd move the scroll down a couple for me, if you would. The SCORE chapters here in Tacoma and Seattle, particularly Seattle chapter, have developed kind of a curriculum that we would encourage all folks that are thinking of starting a business or have recently launched a business to consider, and that is, there's a basic planning component, creating your business structure component, creating a marketing plan, and creating a financial plan. And what we know from our experience in working with folks is that if you deal with each one of those issues and are prepared well, your likelihood that you're going to succeed increases dramatically. So we've created, largely through our support from the Seattle chapter, 4 different workshops. One's creating a business plan in 3 hours. It's kind of a high-level business plan. Another one is successfully starting a business, kind of gives you all the materials you need to form your business, get your license, get your insurance, consider if you need any kind of financing. Then there's a couple marketing components, how to market your business. And finally, because most of the businesses that people operate today are one-person businesses, there's a workshop called Managing Finances for a One-Person Business. So beyond that, we know that if you have that information, and you could attend the workshops, or you could team up with a mentor, which we strongly recommend, to kind of help you work through all this material so you're better prepared. We have about 100 mentors in the Seattle workshop, or Seattle SCORE chapter, and about 20 down in Tacoma. So if you move through this process, my strong recommendation is that you consider, using a SCORE mentor to kind of help you work through this whole process. So anyway, those are some resources that we have available through SCORE. And on the next slide, Kevin, if you'd go there for me. Let's see. So this kind of outlines the makeup of the essential workshops. One is on the left side, business plan, starting a business, marketing components, financing for a one-person business. And then if you happen to be in business and are hiring people and need some kind of financing or capital, forming a formal business plan. So those are 2 additional workshops that you might consider. So again, next slide is, it just really kind of restates what we said earlier, but I'd like to now, I guess, introduce our speaker for today. Kevin is, as he will tell you, is associated with FranNet, a franchise specialist, has been for 8 years or more. He's an Army veteran. I know he lives not far from me in DuPont, not far from ABLM. He's a business educator and does mentoring. So Kevin, thank you for being our presenter today, and I'm turning it over to you.
Terry, thank you so much. And you know, as I go through my presentation, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is kind of what Terry talked about, and it's, you know, kind of how to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success as you start your business, and if you've already started your business, you know, what resources are out there for you. And I will default many times saying, you know, reach out to SCORE and or the SBDC for their resources. You know, wealth of knowledge out there. Almost all of it is free or very low cost, and you get what you pay for sure. So thank you, Terry, for what you and the rest of the SCORE South Sound team do. So we're going to go ahead and start the presentation. So I think ultimately, why business ownership, right? You know, especially now, as we originally scheduled this, we were all going to be sitting together in a room, and this was before anybody knew what coronavirus or COVID-19 was. And, you know, the world's kind of turned on its head right now. And I think that's going to play into this presentation actually pretty well, because I think a lot of people are realizing that, you know, we used to have this traditional path to success, right? It was, you know, depending on what generation you're in, for you or for your parents, this idea that you'd go work for a corporation and you would work there for, you know, 30 years. You would, you know, pay off your house. You probably lived in the same town your whole life. You got a gold watch and a pension, and you had a pretty good retirement. Maybe you moved to Florida. You know, and unfortunately, that's just not the case anymore, right? Very few companies offer pensions any longer. You know, most of the time when we see downsizing, it's kind of happening towards the top. So that path now kind of looks like this, right? Whether it's, you know, your personal goals for retirement, your financial goals, that pension, you know, we're not just, are we moving locations? You know, most people are going to live in multiple states. Most people over the course of their professional career aren't going to just change jobs. They're going to change career fields, right? So, you know, it wasn't even, you know, hey, I do this and I'm going to do this for the rest of my career. And maybe I'll find, you know, a great new business to do it in. You know, a lot of times we're kind of reinventing ourselves. And so for a lot of my clients, they find that the path, you know, the ability to get themselves to where they want to be, particularly as it pertains to retirement, is business ownership and kind of building their own path, if the traditional path isn't an option for them. So we know that business ownership is on the rise in the U.S. There's more than 30 million small businesses. More than 1 million businesses start each year. 65%, the number one reason that people say they want to start a business is they want to be their own boss. You know, how many though of these succeed, right? Great, 1 million new businesses, you know, how do they do? Well, we know that 50% of small businesses fail after 5 years, and that was in some of the presentation that Terry just went through as well. And I don't say that to scare you, and I don't think Terry or anyone at SCORE would say that either, but hopefully that statistic will motivate you to say, I want to be on the right side of that half, right? I want my cup to be half full and half empty. So let's look at some of the reasons why businesses fail. And certainly these are things that you should be able to plan for and or overcome. So the first would be, you know, cash flow, right? Didn't have enough money to start the business or didn't have enough money to sustain the business. I come across a lot of people that are selling or closing their business. And when I ask them, you know, are they just not making enough money? That's the case, right? It's not, you know, Kevin, I've run my business for 2 or 3 years and I'm not making anything. It's, I have a personal need of $5,000 a month in income from the business, and the business is only generating me now in my second year $4,000 a month. I no longer have the savings to cover that extra $1,000 a month. So I'm going to have to close the business and take a job, right? And so, you know, that's kind of a long-term cash flow issue. And I think a lot of people don't prepare for that long-term, right? They think about, do I have enough money to get the doors open? Maybe do I have enough money for the first 6 months? But maybe not necessarily can I fill that gap for an extended period of time. The number two reason is market need. They assumed that, their town or the area that they lived in needed something that maybe they didn't. Maybe there's not as many of their prime customers as they thought. Maybe there's more competition than they realized. But based on their consumer behaviors, they thought that something would be sustainable. And sometimes it's not. As Terry mentioned, I live in DuPont, right? And I see that a lot in DuPont. We're a tight-knit community. We're, mostly military community. People are super proud of the community here. And so a lot of people want to build businesses in DuPont, and I think for good reason. And it's a fantastic community if you can, become a part of it, right? You can really, I think, grow your business well. But from a retail perspective, I've seen a lot of turnover here. And I think some of that is, again, there's an expectation of what market need is, but not necessarily research of what the market need is. And that's certainly something that, Terry and his team, as well as the SBDC, can help you understand factually. Are there enough people that need that product or service? And then the last one would be, don't have the right team, right? And right now, today, I guess in the last 2 weeks, this has really changed a lot. But, prior to, the COVID hit, we had our lowest unemployment and lowest underemployment historically ever, right? And so some of that comes into, I've built this great business, but I can't find the right people, or I can't afford to hire the right people because of the demand, right? And so sometimes that's part of it, right? Or a lot of people, as they build a business, we tend to hire people like us, people with similar backgrounds, people that we get along with, people with a similar vision, versus maybe hiring to our weaknesses, right? And so sometimes that can be problematic, especially if you look at certain industries and things like that. So that right team and those key employees are really important to have in place. Let's talk a little bit about fear, because it should be scary. I always tell my clients, and a typical process with me, from a client saying, Kevin, I'm interested in looking at a business, to they've looked at a couple and they've researched them and they end up buying, typically through me. My expertise is in franchising, usually is somewhere between 60 to 120 days, most of the time 60 to 90 days. And I always tell them, at the time that you're going to go buy that franchise and pay that franchise fee, or you're going to open your doors to a location, if you don't have those butterflies, if you're not at least a little bit cautiously optimistic, you probably haven't done enough research, right? Either that or you're a psychopath, and neither of those are going to serve you well in business. So you should be fearful. It's normal, but you can manage and reduce that. And I think the best way to do that is market industry research, right? Making educated, predictable decisions based on facts, not feelings and emotions. Okay. Creating detailed earnings projections. What's it going to cost you to get into the business? What's your monthly overhead going to be? How long is it going to take you to break even? What are your costs of goods sold? All of these things are things that you can kind of use a scientific, mathematical approach to discovering, and it's going to come through research. And again, Terry and his team and the SBDC and their team are really the best resources to find that detailed information and make an educated decision. And ultimately, don't allow fear to drive the decision-making process, right? If you make good assumptions, if you make good projections, and you've just got a little bit of that pit in your stomach, hopefully you can, push through that. And if not, that's okay too, right? I always tell people, no is an acceptable answer. Not everybody is necessarily meant to be a business owner. There are inherent risks. And if you don't have a little bit of that risk tolerance, you probably are going to be miserable as you would start a new business. So let's talk about your options. So, all right, I think I'm interested. What can I do? Right? You can start it from scratch. You can buy an existing business, or you can become a franchisee. I would say there's option 3B, which would be, you also, franchisees sell their businesses as well, right? So you could buy an existing business that may be a franchise as well. Okay. So we're going to talk about risk, and I want to talk about how can you maximize minimize your time investment and your capital investment, how much money and time you put into it. How can you reduce the risk for yourself and your family? How can you utilize your strengths and overcome your weaknesses? How can you validate that business plan that we talked about? And how can you get better insight into resources? So let's talk about risk first. And I'm going to break risk down into three things. So we're going to talk about the risk of time. right? Because you're going to invest a lot of time into a business, and time is money. You're going to invest actual money into a business. And then let's look at the failure rate. And we're going to look at the failure rate as measured by SBA default rates. So that's how many loans have failed through the SBA process. That's how they're going to measure that. So as we look at starting from scratch, it's really essential that you have some sort of innovation, right? You've got a better mousetrap. You've got a way to differentiate yourself from your competition. You're going to have to be someone that can implement systems and processes. That's going to be, critical to the launching of a business. And you're going to have to do the branding, right? You're going to have to create the logo and the slogan and what is it that people think of when they see your logo and those types of things, right? So that creation is important. And a lot of people are thinkers and they're great at coming up with that new idea, right? And if you watch Shark Tank, you see a lot of that. I've got this great revolutionary product, right? But I just can't figure out how to manufacture it at a reasonable cost, or I can't figure out how to brand it, or I can't build the systems in place to develop this product into a business. And so that production is important. And I think this is a failure point for a lot of people. They've got the great idea, but how do they make it a business? So creating quality control measures, understanding how much product do you need, right? And not producing too much, but not producing not enough, right? You see sometimes using Shark Tank as an example, people hit a failure point because they don't have enough capital to make another run of 100,000 units of something, or they'll say, I bought 500,000 units and I've only sold 50,000. I don't have any money to market, or I can't hire a salesperson to go out and sell it because I put all my money into buying 500,000 widgets. Okay. So that leads us to selling, and creating marketing and advertising materials is going to be critical, and especially finding that customer price point, right? How much will customers pay for your product or service? And then, of course, you're going to need your support staff, right? HR, you're going to need to, hire and fire, retain and develop talent. You're going to have IT. You're going to, have certain needs, whether it's just a computer and a website. Maybe you need cloud computing services. All kinds of different things now fall under the IT category. Certainly accounting is something that you're going to need. Bookkeeping is not something that comes natural to most of us. Tax preparation, understanding how to, what business entity to choose. Do you start as a sole proprietor? Are you an LLC? Are you a C corporation? Are you an S corporation? Those kinds of things. Understanding supply chain management is going to be critical if you're assuming that you're a product and not a service. And if you're a service, then it comes down to workforce scalability, right? So you've created a lawn service. It's going well. You've got two people on your crew. You're mowing, 20 lawns a day. Money's starting to come in. How do you get to another crew, right? So the time investment on a startup is going to be the highest, right? Because you're having to create everything, obviously. The cost investment is typically going to be the lowest upfront to kind of get things going. Now, we see historically that tends to change kind of in time because there's a lot of lessons to be learned. And sometimes we learn lessons, in business and they cost us money, right? So, building up to that scalability versus buying a scaled business or a franchise can certainly incur some cost in time. And unfortunately, the failure rate from startups is the highest. So the SBA tells us that's where that 50% at 5 years. So we're going to measure failure rates at the 5-year mark. So for traditional startup companies, non-franchised, not resold businesses, 50% that's where that failure rate comes from. So let's talk about buying an existing business. And there's two options here. Sometimes people will, and I've been getting a lot of calls for this now, right? There's a lot of people that are saying, hey, retail businesses in particular are going to be struggling. If you have some distressed, resales, let me at them. I'd love to turn some businesses around, or I've got capital to invest to, get through, 3 or 4 months maybe of not being open. Statistically, we know that those turnaround businesses are, their failure rate is in the 80% range. Most businesses that people intend to turn around don't end up getting turned around. So I don't say that to be discouraging, but that's kind of its own category. So we can discuss that one-on-one if that makes more sense for you. But for most people, they're going to look at buying an existing successful business, right? And so, this business has goodwill, it has cash flow, the owner's just ready to retire or wants to move on to another challenge, whatever. So let's assume that's the case. So here we're not creating anything, right? The business exists. Maybe we're going to do some light rebranding. Maybe we want to modify a couple things. Certainly you want to understand and consider, are these changes customers are going to notice? And if they do notice the changes, are they going to be positive or negative changes, right? Do they like this new development or not? From a production standpoint, the processes should be there. There may be room for process improvement, right? So that may be something that you identify as you start to evaluate the business and say, I can kind of lean this system up a little bit. Or, I had a client last year that already had a business with an office space and an administrative assistant at the front desk. And he looked at acquiring another business. And as he looked at that, he knew that he could automatically cut out the requirement or the fixed cost that business had of an office space and an administrative assistant, because it was just a duplication of what he already had. And so he knew right away he could make that business, if he did the same thing that other owner did for the first year, he could make it more profitable because he just didn't have those same costs. So understanding those kinds of things are important. I think a lot of people evaluate existing businesses and they look at, where is the business now? I think it's really important to make sure that you can scale the business into what you want eventually. So the business should be priced at a multiple of cash flow. So the business is, profiting X amount of dollars per year. We're going to sell it for 2 times profits or 3 times profits. But is that enough to get you by long term? Or do you need to, make 50% more than that in 3 years? And if that's the case, I think that's important to analyze and look and say, can I scale this business into what I want it to be, more so than maybe what it is today? When you look at the sales process, right, again, maybe there's some changes in marketing materials. Client retention rate is going to be really critical to consider. Certainly it depends. I look at my business, for example. If I ever went to sell my business, I don't have employees. It's all me, right? And so, for somebody else to say that, well, they're going to just come in and buy my business and they're going to keep working with all the same clients and the same referral sources and things like that. It might be a little bit tough for me to sell someone on that idea, because so much of it is just based on me. It may turn around and do twice as well as I am. But a lot of my business is based on my reputation personally, versus maybe a retail business, right? Where, it may not even be, who knows who the owner is, right? We see a lot of that now. People say, we'll buy local, right? Go to the local businesses. And I would argue that McDonald's is just as much a local business, as any sandwich shop in town. It's owned by a local family as well, even though it is part of a franchise. But people don't have a connection to who is that owner in that particular business, right? So that retention rate wouldn't be affected much by a resale. Of course, can you improve the cost of goods sold? Maybe you can, make it cheaper. Maybe you can, again, see some duplication of effort. Maybe the existing owner doesn't have a certain skill set that they're paying quite a bit for that you could take over yourself, or maybe a spouse or a business partner. And then support, we talked about that support staff. They should have a lot of that team in place already, right? So I think it just kind of comes down to evaluating, is the right team in place? And then looking at employee retention, right? So that team, as you walk into that business, are the right people working in that business? Are those the people that you want to keep and hire? And you're probably going to see some people that you're going to say, yeah, I'm excited to work with this person. And there may be a couple people that say, they're probably not going to make it past their 90-day evaluation. The other thing that I want to add here on support is, if you're getting into a business that has, I would say a critical, like a sales staff or, client management services, right? Where some of your team members have very close personal relationships with your customers, you really probably want to consider that and make sure that those people are going to stay on, not necessarily just, jump ship or take their business to a competitor. You want to do certain things, and contractually there's ways to do that to, keep those people and keep those accounts as you make that transition. Okay. So as we look at the time investment here should be the lowest, because it's already kind of existing. Now I say that it's a bit like, kind of jumping onto a moving train, right? The customer is going to expect that there's no lag time between, when John sells the business and Mark buys the business, right? The consumer doesn't care that there's been a change of ownership. They just care that their products or services are uniform, right? And it's the same thing that they've come to expect. So, you're going to go through that quick transition, but ultimately the time should be the least invested. The cost is going to typically be the highest, and that's going to be, again, in this example, we're assuming you're buying a successful business. So you're literally paying for someone else's success. So because of that, you're going to pay typically a premium for that. And so the cost is typically highest in resales. And then the risk is actually going to be medium. So a lot of people would think that by paying the extra, paying for that success, that you would be likely to be more successful. But the SBA tells us that resales are 62% successful. Now, I would argue that number is going to be thrown off a little bit, because some of those resales, like I said earlier, are going to be those distresses, right? That somebody comes in and says, this business has failed, but I know why, and I'm going to fix it. And we know that a lot of times that doesn't happen. But still, the lion's share of these resales are more the traditional, I've built the business, I've done what I've gotten what I want to get out of it. I'm ready to sell it to someone else. Okay. And option 3 would be franchising, right? And so when you franchise, you're going to be the person that a national brand or maybe an international brand is going to look at to be the local face of that company. And they're going to give you a license to use their name, their trademarks, their products and services, and their systems, right? And all the experience, everything that they've learned by the, however long they've been in business. And then in exchange for that, you're going to pay typically an initial franchise fee. And that's kind of cost of acquisition to kind of get into the system. And then you're going to pay ongoing fees and royalties, right? And that's usually going to be a percentage of your gross sales. So here, when you look at the creation, I would say there's almost none. Really, what I work with my clients to understand is, what box do you fit best in, right? The brands, very few brands are going to mold almost at all to individual owners, right? That's the value of the brand. So it's really about finding the right fit for you. What industry, and then even within an industry, which specific brand inside that industry represents you best. When you look at the production, it's really about what kind of businesses are going to leverage your skills. So it's pretty easy for someone to look at a franchise and say, this is, a good franchise should know specifically, these are the skill sets we're looking for. I work mostly with potential franchisees, but I also spend a lot of my time with franchisors, right, the companies, to help them understand, who is their ideal owner, right? What skill sets do they have? What background are they coming from? Things like that. So when you understand the profile of the ideal owner, then I can, kind of look at my clients and say, okay, great, you fit this mold very, very well. So it's all about leveraging your skills within that business and then implementing their turnkey systems. So we talked earlier about the startup is really about innovation. And when you look at franchising, it's really more about implementation. It's not lost on me as a veteran, we're about 1% to 2% of the population, but 1 in 7 franchises are owned by a veteran. I think a lot of that is because coming out of the military, you're used to implementing systems, right? That's what, people in the military do. We move every 3 years. We get put in a variety of different situations, but it's always implement this plan. And so that's really what they're looking for, is people to do that and be the face of that business locally. When you look at selling, it's going to be important to identify your sales ability and comfort level, and then make sure that that's going to be a fit for what the business does. So there are a lot of businesses that are really consultative selling, right? It's, retail. People are coming into your business. You're not having to sell to them, or, some of the brands that I work with closely were featured on HGTV. I recorded it was on Sunday, but I actually watched it last night. And they did the Extreme Makeover Home Edition, right? And there's some great home service brands that were there that did a variety of, whether it be window treatments and concrete work and custom closets and kitchen redecorating and things like that. But that's consultative selling, right? A person is asking, hey, I want you to come to my house and give me a quote on how much is it going to cost to paint my house, or how much is it going to cost to put window treatments in? I need new blinds in my house, right? So that's consultative selling. But then there are a lot of businesses that are going to require to get out and sell, right? It's kind of more that hunting mentality. Very few people profile that well. So it's important to understand if that's the kind of sales that you have to do, to have assessments to really understand that, can you do that, and will you be happy doing that? And then ultimately, I think it's finding a brand you believe in. A lot of my clients find that it's, any business, you're going to have to sell to some extent. But I think if you find a brand that you really believe in, it doesn't feel like selling. And if it doesn't feel like selling, then it shouldn't sound like selling to the customer. And I think that's really important to consider. When you look at that support team, here it's kind of different because the franchise itself is going to provide a lot of that support, a lot of that structure, the IT, a lot of the HR guidance, those kinds of things are going to come from, that franchise headquarters. You also have, X number of other franchisees, whether they're in your area or other places, that are going to give you help and advice. I'm constantly talking to other franchisees within FranNet. We are franchise as well, and working with them and saying, hey, I'm having trouble with this, or I'm thinking about this. Have you ever tried that? So they become a great support structure, and you're going to understand what is the need for the team building, right? When do you scale? So it's not necessarily, I used the example earlier of, you've built a lawn care business. How many lawns do you have to mow before you, buy a second truck and get a second crew? In a franchise model, you're going to know that. They're going to tell you that up front, and you're going to be preparing for that from the start. They're going to tell you when you get to a certain amount of revenue, that's when you're going to scale to number two and things like that. And those local specialists you'll find is needed, right? So the CPA and some of those things, you'll still need, and you'll work to find those local experts. As we look at the time invested here as a franchisee, it's going to be low to medium. There's going to be differences, right? So if you're looking at a retail facility, it's going to take a while oftentimes to find the location. There's service businesses, that you can go to training, you buy the franchise, you become a franchisee, you go to corporate training for 2 weeks and you come out of training and you've already got your first customers lined up. So it really just depends on the business. The cost investment is going to be medium. And so it's kind of like, if you think about the resale, to some extent, you're kind of paying for that success. Well, here it's kind of the same, right? You're able to look at a brand and say, this brand is, got a high success rate. It's predictable. So you're going to pay that franchise fee to become a part of that system in hopes that you're going to be more successful than you would if you were to do it on your own. And then the failure is actually the lowest. So the SBA tells us that at the same 5-year mark, franchises, 92% are successful at the 5-year mark. Okay. So I like to pause here and caution that that doesn't mean that all franchises are good. This number is, I would say, thrown off by the fact that there's a lot of great franchises with a lot of units. But there also are, if you were to do searches for franchises, there are a lot of things out there that it's very easy for them to make themselves look good on the internet. And so I definitely caution against kind of just that assumption that inherently, if something's a franchise, that it's good, or if it's something that you've experienced as a consumer, that means it's necessarily a good business. I think that research is still just as critical as it is in the other categories. So here's kind of just a graph to represent, what we talked about, the time investment, the cost investment, failure rate. So let's talk about some resources and some things to prepare for. So I think it's important to start with a list of must-haves, right? And this is different for everybody. But some of the common things that people tell me, I want a better work-life balance. I need something that's more predictable. I want a business that I can make an impact in my community. A lot of my clients are looking for that. They're looking for something that they can be proud of. And maybe their job doesn't necessarily give them that impact that they're looking to make in their community. The business must be scalable, right? I need to be able to turn it into this. And I think it's important that you come up with specific numbers, right? I have a minimum income need of blank. And I would say you have that first year, in the first 12 months, how much, if anything, do you need to make? In your second year, how much, if anything, do you need to make? Third year, and so on. And as you're doing your projections, really making sure that you're going to be able to achieve that. And then, of course, a maximum budget, right? Understanding how much can you borrow, or how much are you willing to borrow, right? Just, how much you can borrow, it doesn't necessarily mean that's your comfort zone, but understanding what your budget could be. And then I think it's critical to build a business model, and there's a lot of great tools out there. Certainly, again, Terry and his team at SCORE certainly can help you with some of the templates. But, I think it's important to think about categories at the very least, right? So employees, how many, what kind? A lot of times people think about the what first. I like this business, but then as I talk to them about the employees, they haven't really thought much about what that interaction is like. And there's advantages to, pimply faced teenagers working in fast food. They're easily replaceable. The labor cost is low. You can find them anywhere, right? The downside is the turnover's high. So if that's something that's cumbersome for you, or firing people, or, kind of a direct form of leadership, then that's probably not going to be a great fit for you. Even though you really may love Chick-fil-A, that's still going to be kind of the environment you would operate in, right? Versus operating more with professional employees with a lower turnover rate, where you're going to put, time and effort into them, and you're going to see a return on that investment. Are you better fit for selling a service or a product? Do you want to be in a new or an established industry? What's room for growth? How many units? How do you scale the business? What kind of hours do you want? A lot of my clients are looking for a business to build on the side, whether they want to be semi-retired or they're looking to build a secondary income stream. Maybe they're looking at what's going on in the economy right now and saying, hey, I had job security, but I don't know now. Maybe I need to build something on the side. When I first started doing this 8 years ago, the economy was very different than it is now. And I was working with a lot of outplaced executives that realized that they had to build their own, ladder because they were no longer on the corporate ladder they were on before, and they knew they couldn't just jump on another company nearby at what they were at, right? They had built themselves at 15 years at a certain company, and no other company valued them at what that company did. Again, what's your budget for the business and things like that. I think it's really important to understand the function of the business owner versus the function of the business. And a lot of times people will look and say, I like this industry, but they maybe don't think about what does an owner do, right? And so I like to use home healthcare as an example here. My wife is an Army nurse. She's a nurse practitioner and a clinical nurse specialist. And she's fantastic. She's fantastic on the administrative side. She's fantastic on the patient care side. But she would not be a great home healthcare business owner, because ultimately the role of a home healthcare business owner is to drive business. It's really outbound sales. It's going to hospitals and discharge planners and, rehabilitation facilities and saying, hey, I'm Kevin from, Bright Star Healthcare. I really want to take care of your patients when they're transitioning home. Please send them my way. Feel comfortable in giving me those referrals, right? And then, of course, there's another piece where you're having to build the staff to manage the home care for those patients, but that's typically run by a healthcare professional. So my wife would be fantastic at that piece, the recruiting, retaining, and developing of the nurses, but ultimately somebody has to sell the service to get the patients in the first place. So again, that business owner function is very different than the role of the business. Okay. So I think it's important to look at what is the business owner going to have to do, and then making sure that you have those necessary skills, that you can afford that business, and that it fits your business model, right? Your business should give you what you're looking for. All the things that you say are going to be important: how much money, your lifestyle, who you want to work with, who you want to work for, what kind of customers you want to serve. I want to make an impact, whatever it is for you, the business should give you that, right? This isn't, when you're looking at starting a business, it's very different than taking a job where you're excited when you get one, right? I got 80% of what I was looking for. They gave me the salary, they gave me the vacation time. I was hoping to get one or two other perks I didn't get, but overall I'm happy. It's not like that, because it's not going to build into something, right, that you want it to be, right? You get a job and you anticipate that you'll get raises and things like that. If the business isn't going to give you what you want pretty quickly, it's not likely that it's going to in the long run, right? So don't flex your business model, please. Stick to it. It's important. Consider growth. And right now, one of the advantages, a lot of the clients that I have had in process that I've been working with since obviously before, the COVID outbreak, are really seeing this slide is hitting home, right? Where is growth happening? And a lot of times we think about retail, and it doesn't mean that retail can't be a great opportunity. It certainly can. But if you're anticipating, recession-resistant growth, there's certain places that you can look. And one is convenience services. We see that a lot of people are looking for time, right? We're busier than we've ever been. And so very few people now want to mow their own lawn. If you look at dry cleaning now, like 70% of the money that's made in dry cleaning businesses are wash and fold laundry. It's not just suits and dress pants and dresses. It's, underwear, socks. Here's everything that I wore this week. Put it in a nice folded bag for me, and I'll pick it up. And even that's changing now. People don't want to pick it up. They want delivery, or we're even seeing implementation of lockers now, kind of similar to the Amazon model. So that convenience is really important for a lot of people, and people are willing to pay for their time. So we're seeing that growth, and that's true for different age populations as well. So we're seeing that convenience is something that baby boomers are valuing, right? You hear a lot about, kind of targeting the silver tsunami, but also a lot of millennials and all the generations in between. The aging population obviously is a big one, and a lot of people tend to gravitate there towards home health care, but there's a lot of other things that people need as they're aging in place. Homes have to be retrofitted, right? So maybe, bathrooms have to be remodeled, kitchens have to be remodeled, ramps need to be built, vehicles have to be modified maybe to, become wheelchair accessible, things like that. So there's a lot of other companies that are able to serve that population without being in a traditional healthcare environment. Children's education, certainly we're seeing it now. A lot of parents are feeling this pinch. I'll put myself in that category, and the value of education. But, whether it's daycares, right? And the idea of a daycare is almost gone, right? Everybody now is kind of focused on academies. They want even preschool to be somewhat educational and developmental. It's no longer just, hey, here's a place for my kid to play while I'm at work. Post-school education, so tutoring, making sure that your kid is competitive, caught up where they need to be in the education system, or if your kid's advanced, and they're teaching towards the middle right now, giving your kid the ability to challenge themselves after school. There's a lot of, programs that go into preschools and after school programs and focus on, other supplemental things that, they've taken out a lot of arts and sciences. They've taken out a lot of, PE, and things like that. So, a lot of parents are paying for that now. There's a lot more kids that are enrolled, not just in, things like baseball, but they're going to these just, hey, I'm going and playing for 30 minutes to make sure that I'm getting my outdoor time in a structured environment. Or, I'm going to music lessons, or I'm part of a group band type system that may not be happening in schools. And then the last one would be outsourced business services. And, we saw this, in the last economic pinch. A lot of businesses realized that they could outsource a lot of things that maybe they had internally. So a lot of mid-sized companies that maybe had a marketing department or an HR department or an IT department or even an IT guy realized that they could outsource those things and they could scale it. So if they had a bigger need, then they would pay for just what their need was. But when it was more in maintenance mode, then they didn't have the high overhead. A lot of this came down to the Affordable Care Act as well. A lot of small companies kind of realized that if they could stay within certain numbers of full-time employees, there was financial benefits to them and what they were able to provide. So again, there was kind of more incentive to outsource some of those business services. Probably the best example of this, I would say, happens in outsourcing and scaling the workforce. So one of the top grossing franchises on an annual basis is in staffing, because a lot of companies need, as they grow, they need temporary to permanent hires, right? So they don't have the resources maybe to go out and get a bunch of people at one time. So they'll use a recruiter to do that. They'll bring them in. Maybe it's just project based. Maybe they need them for 30 days, 90 days. Maybe they bring them on and they bring them on full time 6 months down the road. But staffing is a huge industry, again, to help small businesses with that scalability of their business. Assessing your skills is important. I think a lot of people that I work with are unrealistic about their skills. More often than not, it's negative. It's not necessarily, this braggadocious, I'm perfect at everything. It's usually, I don't think I can do that, or I've never done that, so I'm not comfortable in that role. But ultimately, they may have some of those things, or they may have a preconceived notion of what selling is, for example. And it may just mean that they don't want to do the direct hard sale, but they are good with the consultative selling, especially if it's something they believe in. And so there's some great resources out there for personality, values, leadership style tests. We offer a test. It's called the Business Evaluation and Suitability Test. My partner Charlie or I would be happy to send that out to anybody that's interested. If you want to take that, it's an online assessment. We'll be happy to review the results with you, even if you're not looking necessarily at franchising or working with us directly. We really believe in that tool, and it'll pull up values. And we actually find the most important part of that assessment is that values piece as far as finding the right business. I can sit down and look at what someone values and tell them certain industries are or are not going to be a good fit based on that, more so than any leadership style or skill set and things like that. And a good example of that would be, our belonger clients, right? Want to be a part of something bigger than themselves, and they want to make a positive impact in the community. So some of these high sales type businesses don't typically do well for them. They usually are conservative in nature, and they want to be a part of the community. So things where they're benefiting businesses, things where their sales pitch, if you will, sounds like, I have a product or service that can make your life or your business better or higher functioning, or I can help you in some way. Those are going to be the types of businesses that are going to be the best fit for them. So skills assessments, particularly unbiased skills assessments, I think are critical. Financial preparation, obviously we talked about, that's the number one failure point for businesses. I suggest starting with a household income. Again, like I said earlier, a lot of the people that I come across that are selling their business, it's not because the business has failed. It's not because the business isn't making money. It's that it's not making enough money fast enough, right? So understanding what your real monthly household needs are is important. A lot of times I work with my clients on how to minimize that number for the period. So if you're going to ramp up a business for 6 to 12 months, most likely, are there some things in that household budget that you can cover? And sometimes people will come to me and say, my spouse's income covers our whole budget. So I can leave my job and I can start a business. And if I don't make money, that's okay. And that's perfect. Most of the time, that's not the case. And so understanding what you'll need to put in to take out a savings on a monthly basis is critical. Understanding funding options is really important. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Determining your costs to start and open and run the business, that working capital. Again, typically it's going to be 6 to 12 months, but that really depends on a lot of factors. Preparing for the unforeseen. Certainly I have clients that just opened. I had a client in Texas that, just opened a hair salon, 30 days ago, and all of a sudden they're closed, right? That's tough. As they're looking at ramping up their business. Sometimes those types of things happen. So, those rainy day funds are really important. And then knowing, again, when are you going to need the income and how much? So I talked about funding options. So let's look here. Ultimately, you're going to have to come up with cash on some level, right? So let's assume that you're going to get a loan through the SBA, and the SBA doesn't actually do loans. Banks do loans, and the SBA kind of insures or guarantees them. But let's say that you need, $100,000, okay? The SBA is going to say, all right, we'll give you a 75% loan to value ratio. So you put in $25,000 of your own money, we'll give you a loan for $75,000 for the rest, okay? So you're going to have to come up with that $25,000. I would argue that you should have some post-closing liquidity, right? So that rainy day fund for when the SBA loan runs out. What if you need $105,000? Where does that other $5,000 come from? Home equity line of credit can be an option for that initial injection or long-term money, particularly if you own a second home, like an investment property or a vacation home. Obviously, banks are going to be a good resource, and that can be SBA or just line of credit, especially if you're looking for a smaller loan. Just a line of credit or a signature loan. It can make sense for some people. Certainly, some people are going to look for partnerships, relatives, friends, things like that. I would just caution you a lot of times people think, well, I'll invest half as much if I find a partner, but you're also going to split your profits in half. So just keep that in mind. And certainly, I think you are wise to have an attorney help you draw up some, dissolving of the business contracts. What happens if someone needs to leave the business? What happens if you just don't get along? What does a buyout look like? Things like that. If you're looking at a resale, seller financing is probably an option. A lot of times as people look to sell their businesses, they're happy to, kind of hold all or part of a note on that, and have the new owner pay them, monthly for the business. And then the last one that's in the middle is called a rollover. The IRS allows for what's called a rollover for business startups. And essentially what you're able to do is take qualified money from retirement accounts. It could be a 401k, 403b, IRA, whatever, as long as it's traditional and not Roth. And you can take money from that account and you essentially buy stock in your own company. So you create a corporation and then you're going to buy stock in that. So right now your 401k may have a lot of stock in Amazon, and you're going to change that to Smith Holdings is going to be what you're going to buy common stock in that company. And as the CEO of that company, you can use that common stock to, run your business for startup expenses. You can also use that as collateral for an SBA loan. So we talked about that 25, 75. You can still get that 75 from the SBA, and maybe that 25,000 comes out of a retirement account. Okay. There's no taxes or penalties or fees or anything associated with that transaction, but it is obviously running through the IRS. I think it's critical that there's a couple companies that really do this and have done this for decades. And I think it's really critical that you use them as the service provider to do it, because it certainly does need to be done right. And at that point, you're kind of creating stock. So there is some ongoing maintenance of the account, if you will, and compliance that you're going to be running through. So that's an option, certainly for some people, that a lot of people don't think about. Certainly if you or someone that is thinking about just liquidating a retirement account, lost my job, I'm going to just, close out that retirement account, I'm going to pay the penalties. Please, if you or someone else is in that situation, reach out to me. I'd be happy to put you in touch with some experts who can help you understand if there's a better option there to not just give Uncle Sam a large portion of what you've worked so hard to earn. All right, understanding earning potential. I think it's critical, obviously. we're doing this at some level to make money. I think it's important to note that there's not a correlation between the cost of a business and the return, right? A lot of times, you hear, the rich get richer, it takes money to make money. Certainly to start a business, it's going to take money. But I don't think there's necessarily a correlation between, I put $1 million or $2 million into a McDonald's and I'm making a larger return on that money than I would have if I would have started a lawn care business. In fact, oftentimes we find the opposite. A lot of times the high cost of a business means you're in a high overhead situation, and they tend to be lower profit margins. We use restaurants as an example. They're some of the lowest profiting percentage businesses around. So, service businesses, on the other hand, tend to be much higher, right? Especially now with technology, you see a lot of great service businesses that are operated from home. So you don't have that overhead of an office space on a daily basis. You can have an administrative assistant that can work remotely, saving you a lot of, resources. Technology can do a lot of that stuff for you. Scheduling and all that kind of stuff can be done online, and you don't even need a person to actually do it. So don't get caught up in it costs a lot of money to make a lot of money. And I also encourage people, don't get caught up, especially if you're looking at industries and you're going to see things like, the average gross sales in this is $1 million, right? The average, home health care franchise bills $1 million a year. That's great. But what are they making in profit, right? And so focus on that EBITDA, focus on that net cash flow, the profit. There's different ways to look at it. But at the end of the day, what are you going to put in your pocket is more important than how much money did the business make, because it may have a significantly higher or lower profit margin. Okay. So what are you going to put in your pocket is more important than how much are you doing in billing. I see this a lot with government contracts. A lot of veteran clients that I work with have a comfort level in working with the government. And so they look for government contracts and they get excited about the fact that, I just landed the, lawn maintenance contract for JBLM and it's, $2 million a year. and it's like, okay, well, it's $2 million a year, but it's, 5% profit margin. That's pretty lean. If you have some issues, that's going to come out of your side and not theirs, right? So, consider those kinds of things. I think that's pretty critical. A lot of people don't consider the possibility of a manager running day-to-day operations, right? And I think that's very difficult to do in a startup. But maybe if you're buying an existing business, certainly if you're looking at franchising, a lot of franchises have built structure in place so that a manager can run day-to-day operations, allowing the owner to keep their job. So I use the example of, hair care earlier. I'm going to use it in a minute as we talk about cost. A manager is going to run that. If you're not a hairstylist, there's no need for you to be there on a daily basis. Trust him or her to run the business. They'll also be one of your lead stylists. And your time is going to be spent on managing the manager and managing the KPIs, the key performance indicators on the business, right? How are sales looking? Do you need to make a switch in marketing? Managing your inventory, things like that. And then ultimately, I think a lot of people forget to focus on the resale value of the business and setting themselves up for the resale. So, you should be able to sell a business for a multiple of earnings, cash flow. And I think that's important, but it's also important to prep yourself for that. So, putting the right team in place, the more predictable that you can make it look for an owner, I think, the better, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to sell your business and sell it for a good multiple. We typically see that resales in franchising go for usually 1 to 2 times multiple over comparable, independent mom and pop businesses. And again, some of that is because of that predictability, right? Someone can buy, if you buy a McDonald's, if you buy the McDonald's in DuPont, you're able to see not just the McDonald's in DuPont, but you're also able to see all the other McDonald's around. And so you can say, well, there's room to grow, right? They're middle of the road. Whereas if you buy an independent one-off location, it's difficult to see what is that room for growth, right? Because there's nothing really to compare it to. All right, let's talk about franchise costs a little bit. So here, when you look at cost, and this is going to be, I'm going to call it, somewhat of an all-in expense, and I'm going to break down exactly what this looks like in a minute. But you'll see that over half of franchises are going to be less than a $250,000 all-in investment. And what does that mean? So let's look at a specific example. So here, think about a value brand hair salon. So think about like a Supercuts or a Great Clips, right? And this is going to be in an item 7 in any franchise disclosure document. They're going to have a chart that's going to look very similar to this. And it's going to be all of your expenses to get open and some working capital. So they're going to list a low and a high, and you're going to have a low and a high because some people are buying in multiples. Inherently, development is going to look different. Cost of labor is going to look different. Price per square foot in rental is going to look different. So you're going to see that low to high here for the franchise fee, right? That's that just kind of cost of entry. The difference there is going to be, they usually are going to charge a lower franchise fee per unit if you buy multiples. So a lot of times franchises are looking for people to buy multiple territories or locations. And so they incentivize that with lower franchise fees. Leasehold improvements. You got to turn it from what it used to be into a hair salon, right? And so on the low end, maybe you inherited an old hair salon that went out of business and you're just rebranding and some of the stuff's already there. The plumbing's there, the bathroom's there, things like that. On the high end, I had a client that bought what was a large hibachi grill business, a restaurant that went out, and a sandwich shop took what was the dining room, and so they got the bathroom and all that kind of stuff, and he got what was the kitchen. And so he spent several $1,000s removing a 10,000-pound hibachi grill, right? And then he had to build a bathroom, and then he had to put plumbing in for 10 hair care stations and things like that. So you're going to see a variety there. Furniture and equipment, obviously you're building out the stations, computer point of sale system, inventory, right? You got to have the shampoos and the hair products, employee training, travel expenses, right? So again, this is really detailed. Okay. You're going to go to their training at headquarters for 2 weeks and learn how to run the salon. First month's rent security deposit. There's going to be a variation there depending on the cost of the retail. Grand opening advertising. This blows a lot of people away, right? And this isn't every franchise. right? That's $15,000. That's probably more than I've spent in marketing in the last 5 years in my business. Okay. But in this particular industry, they know that you've got to tell people multiple times, we're here, we're next to the grocery store, come see us, we're open, here's a coupon. Okay. And so they're going to put a lot of money into that initial advertising to try to ramp the business up quickly. Of course, you're going to have signage. And then again, you're going to see working capital. So you can look at that number and say, okay, it's going to probably cost me somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 a month to operate the salon. And then from there, you can kind of figure out, how long are you going to need to float that before you would get to break even. So your estimated total investment is going to be, 140, let's call it 142,000 to 286,000. Okay. So you're going to kind of understand that. And this is going to be, again, these categories are going to be different with different industries, but any franchise should give you this. Now, if you're not looking at a franchise and you're looking at developing an an independent business, these things are still helpful, right? You're still going to have most of these, right? You're not going to have a franchise fee. Your leasehold improvement is probably going to be more because you're not going to have a blueprint to work with, right? Your furniture and equipment, same thing. You're probably going to spend more than that because you're not buying in the bulk that this national brand is, right? You're still going to need the computer system. You're still going to need inventory. Your inventory is probably going to cost you a little bit more because, again, you're not getting that same break that the unit with 3,000 locations does, right? Training, that may not be training and travel expenses for the owner may not be a category for you. First month's rent, security deposit going to be the same. A lot of times that rent may be more expensive because it's predictability, right? So if you're opening a Supercuts, we know what the failure rate of Supercuts is. If you're building, Bob's Haircuts, we don't know how successful you're likely to be. So things like that. So again, using these as examples to help you with an independent business, I think can be helpful. We talked a lot about resources. There's a lot of local experts, and I think there's different experts depending on what you're looking for. So if a startup is really, what makes sense for you, then I think your first steps are SCORE and the SBDC. There's also the Washington Center for Women in Business. There's other resources that are, free and low cost that are out there as well. Certainly you're going to need an attorney, an accountant, those kinds of things. If you're looking at a resale, I would say all of the same resources apply. I think it's really important to have a good business broker as well to help you kind of filter out what's out there. You can go on websites like BizBuySell and things like that, but most of it's just junk. It's not like buying a house and going to Redfin and saying, these are legitimate houses at reasonable prices that people really want to sell. A lot of the listings that are out there are, really ways for business brokers to try to gain attention and gain business, or, business owners that are just throwing an unrealistic valuation on their business just in hopes that somebody buys it. So a good business broker is really important to have, I think. And then certainly an attorney and an accountant to look at the books, right? Because your value of that business is going to be based on their previous sales. So you want someone to look over those documents and make sure that they are what the owner is representing the business as. If you're looking at franchises, myself, my partner, Charlie McGee, we'd be happy to help you. There's other people in the industry that do what I do. To find a franchise coach or, a franchise consultant should not cost you money. Franchises pay us to bring them qualified candidates and help them through the process. So that should be, no matter who you're using, should be a free resource to you. SCORE, obviously, Small Business Development Center as well, building those business models, are certainly helpful. Typically for us, if I'm working with a client, I still encourage the client to lean on SCORE and the Small Business Development Center for a lot of that data research, right? Understanding demographics in the local area and those sorts of things. We lean with them as well. And certainly as they open their business, the franchise is going to give them a lot of great resources, but I think it's always a good idea to have some other local business advisors in your corner. I mentioned this earlier, but if you are really looking at franchising, just be careful what you find on the internet. Even in magazines, I get a lot of people will say, the Inc. 500 or Entrepreneur Magazine said the best 10 franchises are this, and there's never any qualification of why, right? What is it based on? I routinely see Subway on those, and I think a lot of it's because they're marketing a lot. They're going to close 500 restaurants this year. Is it a good franchise? I don't know. It could be. It depends on what you're looking for. So ultimately, I think finding the right fit for you and then making sure that it's a reliable business with a good repayment rate, that it's got a high success rate is critical, versus, it's advertised as a great franchise with little qualification of why. So just kind of be careful of what information and what is it really saying, and where is it coming from. I think it's important. Some other resources, E-Myth Revisited, for me, this is, I think, the best business book that I've read. It reads kind of like a novel. Michael Gerber kind of goes through the most common reasons that businesses fail, the 5 biggest mistakes that they make. It's great. It's a great way to avoid making those mistakes as you own a business. If you've already started a business and maybe you've made some of those mistakes, he also will help you understand kind of how to get out of that. And then the other would be Street Smart Franchising. And again, this is obviously if you're looking franchising specific, it's probably the best kind of behind the scenes look at franchising that I've seen. It's a really good, honest look at what franchising is and how to kind of structure, your research and what to look for in a good franchise and how to identify a not good franchise. And then, of course, again, the resources we've talked about, multiple times, SCORE, the Small Business Development Center, Washington Center for Women in Business, myself and my team here in FranNet in Washington certainly would be happy to help. Here is my information. You can definitely feel free to reach out to myself or Charlie directly. Here's our phone numbers and emails. I'll keep this up for just a minute, and then I'm going to kick over to the slide with the SCORE information as well. And of course, if you, for some reason didn't get this, we are going to send out a recording as well. But if you reach out to Terry can certainly tell you how to get a hold of Charlie and myself as well. So that's it for me. Thank you guys so much for your time. At this point, I'd like to open up for questions. I'm not going to unmute the lines if that's okay. It just kind of can get chaotic that way. But please feel free to use the questions or chat function with any questions that you may have. And Terry and myself will go ahead and field those questions now. How much does a polar bear weigh? Enough to break the ice. Here we go. I can't, Terry. Oh, I thought we had a question, but it's Paul saying great presentation. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. Great. I think you did exactly what we kind of advertised, and that was how to understand how we can reduce risk and find the right fit. So I appreciate that, and I'm sure others did too. I would just say on SCORE's behalf, Tacoma SCORE, we're there to help you. Our primary focus is one-on-one mentoring. So if you feel the need to hook up with a SCORE mentor, Tacoma SCORE, so you can always just go to the website tacoma.score.org, or if you're closer to Seattle, seattlescore.org, and reach out to us and we'll set up an appointment. We, as I said earlier, because of the COVID-19, we're not doing face-to-face mentoring now or face-to-face workshops. So we would probably end up doing them online, or do email or perhaps phone. And at the point where we can meet again, we'd love to do that. So hopefully this was worth your hour and a half. And if you feel like you'd like to get additional information, just reach out to us at tacomascore.org. So any questions? Did you see any, Kevin?
I haven't seen any pop up yet, so maybe we'll just hold for a second. It looks like there's still, I think, 8 people that are still online. So again, for anybody that's there, if you can just use the questions function and type in a question, Terry and I will be happy to answer those. if you don't have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and log off, and then we will know that you're good. Again, myself and or Terry will send out a recording of the presentation to those of you that attended. It looks like we've got a couple people hung up. We got 2 people left.
One. Okay. Thanks, Kevin.
Yep, I think we're good. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Terry, thank you so much. I'll get the link to the recording over to you as soon as we have it. Have a great day, Terry.
Thank you. Bye.